What actually makes a defender in Pathfinder? Is it high armor class, carrying a shield, standing in front and hoping for the best? Because if that's all the defender is, then most parties already have one, and they still fall apart. Today, we're breaking down 5 archetypes that actually do the defender's job. Not by dealing damage, not by being flashy, but by controlling space, stopping bad turns, and keeping the party alive when things go all wrong. Let's be clear, this isn't a tier list, and this isn't about what's strong in the vacuum. This video is about defender tools, the archetypes that bolster the defender role, and how they do it differently. For each archetype, we're answering 2 questions. Which feats actually matter for defenders? And is this archetype strong enough to replace class feats, or is it best used as a free archetype add-on? If you're building a frontline character, or your party keeps collapsing even with one, this video is for you. To understand what a defender is supposed to look like, we need to start with the archetype that sets the baseline, the gold standard. Let's talk about Bastion. If you want to understand what Pathfinder actually expects a defender to do, you start with the Bastion. This archetype doesn't add tricks, side system, or flashy damage riders. It takes the core defensive mechanics of the game, shields, reactions, positioning, and turns them into a reliable and repeatable way to protect both yourself and your party. When people ask, what does a real defender look like in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Bastion is the answer the system itself gives. From a defender role perspective, Bastion is doing 3 critical things at once. First, it raises your baseline survivability, not through raw hit points, but through damage prevention, which is far more valuable at higher levels of play. Second, it multiplies your reaction economy. A defender who can react more often is a defender who can control the flow of combat. And third, and this might be arguably the most important part, it allows you to intercept damage meant for allies, not just yourself. When evaluating Bastion for a defender build, these are the feats that actually matter. Reactive Shield is your foundation. It lets you raise your shield as a reaction, which immediately improves your action economy and ensures you're protected even when combat starts unexpectedly. Shield Warden is where Bastion truly becomes a defender archetype. This feat allows you to shield block for an adjacent ally. You are no longer just reducing damage, you're redirecting it. This single feat alone is enough to justify Bastion on many frontline builds. Quick shield block pushes this even further. An additional reaction per round, restricted to shield block, means you can consistently protect either yourself or an ally without having to sacrifice offense or positioning options. Reflective Shield shores up one of the classic defender weaknesses. Shields don't normally help against reflex saves, but Bastion makes them relevant against explosions, breath weapons, and other area effects. This dramatically improves your survivability in mid and high level play. Finally, Drive Back adds control without sacrificing defense. You're not just blocking, you're pushing enemies out of position and interfering with attacks meant for your allies. It is important to be clear here though, Bastion is not about damage output, aggressive mobility, or burst turns. If you're looking for something flashy or having some striker synergy, Bastion's gonna feel pretty slow. But if your goal is to make bad enemy turns happen more consistently, then this archetype can help deliver that round after round. This is one of the rare archetypes that is absolutely viable as a main dedication. If your class already wants to be on the front line, I'm talking about fighters, champions, guardians, and even some monk or ranger builds, Bastion is absolutely worth spending class feats on. And as a free archetype, it's obviously excellent. But Bastion doesn't need the free archetype system to justify itself. That alone should tell you how strong it is. Now, Bastion does pair best with classes that already have shield block. These are builds that want to stay adjacent to allies and parties that value consistency over burst damage. If your job is to stand between the enemy and the rest of the table, Bastion gives you the tools to do it without apology. If Bastion teaches us how to block a blow, Night Vigilant teaches us where that blow is allowed to land. This archetype is built around a very specific defender fantasy, standing between danger and the people who can't afford to take the hit. Night Vigilant doesn't just protect allies. It redefines positioning, turning cover, reactions, and movement denial into real, repeatable defensive value. You see, Night Vigilant approaches defense from a different axis than Bastion does. Instead of focusing purely on damage mitigation, it emphasizes positional control, movement denial, cover manipulation, and reaction-based intervention. In practical terms, this archetype makes where you stand matter more than how hard you can be hit. That's a very defender-oriented skill set. The dedication itself immediately establishes the theme. When you stand between an ally and an enemy, you upgrade the cover that you provide, turning lesser cover into standard cover. That's some pretty good passive protection applied round after round without any action cost. From there, the archetype leans hard into control. Interrupt Charge is one of the cleanest movement denial reactions in the game. Enemies trying to disengage or reposition are slowed or stopped entirely, right when it might seem to matter most. At higher levels, Instinctual Interception takes this even further by granting an extra reaction each turn that can only be used to shut down movement. That's Defender Action Economy in its purest form. Shield Warden, as was shared with Bastion, reinforces the archetype's role as an ally-first defender. If you're already investing in shields, Night Vigilant gives you another way to convert that investment into party protection. Then there's Body Barrier. This is the moment where Night Vigilant fully commits to the defender identity. When an area effect hits you and your allies, you grant them cover, and you personally take on extra danger to do it. That's not just tanking, that's actually defending. Finally, Imperial Aura closes the loop at high levels. Enemies around you are slowed simply for existing in your presence, reinforcing your role as a walking denial zone. Now, Night Vigilant is not a passive archetype. It asks you to track positioning carefully, anticipate enemy movements, and stay engaged in the center of the fight. If you prefer a more set it and forget it style of durability, Bastion is going to feel easier to play. Night Vigilant rewards situational awareness, not autopilot play. For most characters, Night Vigilant shines brightest as a free archetype. It offers powerful defender tools, but it asks for multiple feat investments, specific positioning habits, and reaction management. This makes it an excellent overlay on an already functional defender chassis, but as a main dedication, it's viable, but only for builds that are already committed to shields, armor, and frontline presence, such as champions or guardians. Because of this, Night Vigilant works best with shield-using frontliner characters who already want to stand adjacent to allies, and parties that struggle with enemy mobility or flanking pressure. If your table often loses fights because enemies get around the front line, Night Vigilant fixes that problem pretty directly. So far, we've seen two ways to defend: blocking damage outright and controlling the space where damage can happen. Next, we're gonna step away from personal durability entirely and take a look at an archetype that makes the entire party harder to break. Martial is not a defender in the traditional sense. It doesn't block attacks, it doesn't soak damage, and it doesn't stand and dare enemies to swing at it. Instead, Martial answers a different question. How do you stop a party from falling apart? And the answer it gives is coordination. Martial defends by reducing failure, not by absorbing hits. From a defender role perspective, this archetype contributes through save bonuses, flanking denial, forced positioning, and reaction-enabled teamwork. A party with a Martial makes fewer mistakes. And if we're being real, mistakes are usually what end up getting characters and parties killed. That's some real defensive value, even if it doesn't look like a shield. See, everything about the Martial revolves around its aura. Right out of the gate, Martial provides a status bonus to saves against fear for anyone nearby. This alone smooths out encounters that rely on morale, intimidation, or crowd control. From there, the stance you choose determines how you defend. Inspiring Martial Stance, for example, is the most defender-focused option. It boosts attack rolls and saves against mental effects, increasing consistency and resiliency across the entire party. Back to Back is one of the most underrated defensive feats in the system. Adjacent allies cannot be flanked unless both of you are flanked. That single rule shuts down a massive amount of off-guard pressure. Martial also excels at reactive positioning. Cadence Call and its upgrade, Tactical Cadence, allow allies to reposition quickly, often avoiding danger entirely rather than mitigating it after the fact. Form Up turns chaos into structure. You don't just react to enemy movement, you reform the battlefield to deny flanks, protect casters, or reinforce a collapsing line. Finally, feats like General's Gambit and Target of Opportunity apply pressure to enemy reactions, preventing them from punishing your allies' movement or actions. The Martial is not a personal survivability archetype. It's not going to increase your AC directly, it's not going to improve damage reduction, or give you the emergency stay standing buttons. If you try to use Martial to fix a fragile character, newsflash, it's not. Martial assumes you're already functional and makes everyone better around you because of it. In my opinion, Martial is a free archetype all-star. See, it's going to compete pretty heavily with class feats and often rarely justifies replacing them outright, especially on Martial defenders who are going to rely on those feats that help build off of their already existing defenses. But as a free archetype, the Martial is phenomenal. It layers cleanly into any front line, it doesn't demand specific weapons or armor, and it scales naturally with party coordination. If you're using the free archetype variant, Martial is one of the strongest defensive overlays you can add to a defender build. As I said earlier, Martial works best with frontliners who already hold space, parties that fight close together, and groups that are vulnerable to fear, flanking, or just chaotic movement. If your defender's job is to keep the party intact, the Martial turns that job from reactive to proactive. So far, we've looked at blocking damage, controlling space, and reinforcing the party as a unit. Next, we're going to talk about an archetype that embraces a different defender philosophy entirely. Standing still, refusing to move, and daring the battlefield itself to break first. Some defenders protect allies by reacting quickly. Others protect them by controlling space. Stalwart Defender protects allies by making one thing very clear. This ground is not negotiable. This archetype is built around a single idea. If the enemy cannot move through you, the party survives. From a defender role perspective, Stalwart Defender contributes through area denial, forced repositioning, armor-based damage reduction, and resistance. It doesn't rely on burst reactions or complex timing. It wins by making the battlefield itself hostile to enemies who try to push forward. If your party needs a defender who defines where the fight happens, this archetype does exactly that. Everything in Stalwart Defender begins with Tenacious Stance. When you enter this stance, you gain temporary hit points and strong resistance against being shoved or tripped, the most common tools enemies use to break a front line. In exchange, you fully accept your armor's penalties. That trade-off is intentional. The Stalwart Defender is not about flexibility, it's about making a commitment. Tunnel Wall reinforces that identity immediately. By raising your shield and anchoring yourself, you dramatically increase the difficulty for enemies attempting to tumble through your space. You aren't chasing threats, you're blocking the routes. Unshaken in Iron is one of the archetype's quiet power spikes. Armor specialization applies broadly, and while in Tenacious Stance, that resistance scales even higher. This is always on damage mitigation that doesn't consume actions or reactions. At mid-levels, Rupture Stomp turns your presence into terrain control. The area around you becomes difficult or even greater difficult terrain, making movement around you slow, costly, and predictable. For sustaining, Gathering Moss provides fast healing as long as you hold your stance. The longer you hold your ground, the harder you are to remove. And when you need to weather forced pressure, Stone Body offers a short but powerful window of resistance to all damage, perfect for surviving enemy commitment at the choke point. Now, the Stalwart Defender does not reward constant repositioning. It's not designed for skirmishing, hit and run tactics, or reaction heavy interception play. Instead, it asks a simple question every encounter. Where is the most important place to stand? And then it builds everything around, refusing to leave that spot. The Stalwart Defender is an exceptionally strong as a free archetype. In a free archetype game, Tenacious Stance layers cleanly onto existing Defender chassis, armor scaling and resistance stack without competing for class feats, and area denial tools enhance your role rather than replacing core features. As a main dedication, Stalwart Defender is still viable, but it comes with some real cost. Not because the archetype is weak, but because it asks to replace class feats that may already define your role. So it's not necessarily a flaw, but there's definitely a trade-off there. Stalwart Defender works best with heavy armor frontliners, shield users who want to hold choke points, and parties that fight in tight terrain or defensive formations. If your party struggles when enemies force their way through a specific spot, the Stalwart Defender exists to make that strategy fail. So far, we've seen defenders who block damage, control space, reinforce allies, or anchor the battlefield itself. To close off this list, we're going to look at a defender that operates differently. Not by stopping attacks, but by preventing bad turns from becoming disasters. Not every defender stops damage by standing in front of it. Some defenders protect the party by making sure that when things go wrong, they don't spiral out of control. That's what the Blessed One does. This archetype isn't about armor, positioning, or reactions. It's about stabilization, keeping allies functional when conditions, attrition, and bad luck threaten to end the fight early. Now, Blessed One might not seem like a defender-based archetype, but from a defender role perspective, Blessed One contributes through condition mitigation, emergency stabilization, sustaining under pressure, and failure prevention. This archetype doesn't stop the hit, it stops the aftermath. And in Pathfinder, conditions and cascading penalties are often more dangerous than the raw damage itself. See, everything begins with Lay on Hands. Even at its baseline, this is one of the most action-efficient healing tools in the game. It's a single action, has solid healing, has built-in AC bonus, and for a defender, that AC bonus matters. It reduces follow-up damage and keeps allies standing longer. But where the Blessed One truly earns its place is with Mercy. Mercy allows Lay on Hands to counteract conditions. Things like frightened, sickened, clumsy, enfeebled, or stunned, depending on your selections. This is critical defender utility because conditions are what turn manageable encounters into party wipes. Greater Mercy expands that list even further, allowing you to address slowed, restrained, confused, and other fight-ending effects as the levels increase. Then there's Blessed Denial. This reaction reduces the value of a condition as it's applied. This is preemptive defense, stopping a condition from ever reaching its most dangerous thresholds. At higher levels, feats like Rejuvenating Touch add sustained temporary hit points over multiple rounds, rewarding proactive defensive play rather than panic healing. Blessed One doesn't ask you to guess where the danger is going to be, it gives you the tools to respond when danger inevitably happens where you're already defending. Now, Blessed One is not a frontline durability archetype. It doesn't increase your armor proficiency, it doesn't improve damage mitigation directly, or control any kind of enemy movement. If you're trying to replace a shield or a choke point defender, this is not going to do that. Instead, this archetype is designed to complement those styles of defenders. Blessed One is at its best as a free archetype. In a free archetype game, it layers perfectly onto any defender or frontline support. It adds crisis management without competing for core class feats, and it turns a defender into a stabilizing anchor for the entire party. Now, as a main dedication, Blessed One is still playable, but it's usually a pretty hard sell unless your class already has really strong defensive fundamentals. But even then, it's really not an option you're going to take if you're just trying to buff defense. Again, that's not a weakness, it's about role clarity. Blessed One defends by keeping the party operational, not by replacing your already effective defensive tools. This means that Blessed One works especially well with shield-based defenders, heavy armor frontliners, and parties that tend to be vulnerable to fear, poison, curses, or other types of battlefield condition control. If your table loses fights because the conditions begin to pile up faster than they can be answered, Blessed One can pretty much solve that problem directly. Ultimately, defenders in Pathfinder don't all look the same. Some block the blow, some control the space, some hold the line, and others make sure the fight doesn't fall apart when things start to go sideways. Understanding what kind of defense your party needs is what turns a good build into a great one. Defenders in Pathfinder aren't defined by a single stat, a single class, or a single piece of gear. They're defined by what they stop from happening. Sometimes that means blocking damage. Sometimes that means denying movement. Sometimes it means holding ground, reinforcing the party, or preventing a bad turn from becoming a disaster. These archetypes that we covered today don't all defend the same way, but every one of them answers a real defender problem at the table. And once you understand which problem your party actually has, well, choosing the right archetype becomes easy. If this breakdown helped you rethink how defenders work, hit the like button. It helps more than you think. And if you want to see some more Pathfinder content that breaks builds down by party role, make sure to hit the subscribe. And if you want to see these style of archetypes in action, check out the Defender builds that are on the channel, or those soon to come, where we take these tools and actually show how they play at the table. Until next time, control the dice, alt the meta, and build the legend.